May the peace of Christ be with us all today and in the days to come. During this Christian season celebrating creation, Reverend Ian has asked me to speak about honeybees and what they might teach us about the wonders of nature created by God. For those of you who are online and don't know me, my name is Bill Kirby, and I have been learning about honeybees for over 40 years now, and I'm pleased to share some of their fascinating world with you. According to Reverend Ian's concordance search, there are 58 references to honey in the Bible. The vast majority of them are in the Old Testament. The most common reference, of course, is to the promised land for the Israelites as being a land flowing with milk and honey. This poetic description of Israel's land emphasizes the fertility of the soil and the bounty that awaited God's chosen people. The reference to milk suggests that many livestock could have found pasture here. The mention of honey suggests a vast farmland acreage available. The bees had plenty of plants to draw nectar from. We generally accept the phrase milk and honey as a metaphor, meaning all good things, God's blessings, a place of abundance that is free from want. I have read that according to some, a human can actually survive well on a diet of just milk and honey. So perhaps the phrase is meant to indicate that all one's food is to be plentiful in a land flowing with milk and honey. Honey is the result of bees gathering nectar from flowers, and then they mix it with some enzymes in a special honey stomach in their bodies. That liquid is then stored in cells of honeycomb, and the hexagonal shape that they have created is the most advanced design yet to store material goods in. Once it's in the cells, it's then fanned by their wings to evaporate the excess water. And only when it reaches the right percentage of moisture to prevent it from going bad is it capped and then stored for later use. How an insect in total darkness inside a hive can accurately measure the percentage of moisture in the honey is just one of the amazing skills that bees have. By safely storing over 75 pounds of honey every year, they should have enough to survive the winter here in Canada until the early spring flowers appear. When you think of it, honey is an amazing gift of love. The flowers freely offer nectar so that the bees will come and move their pollen, and by pollinating them, they carry on their species. Bees willingly gather the pollen and nectar in order to raise their young and continue their species. Another act of love as the next generation of bees is carefully raised. Humans carefully work with honeybees to protect them and keep them healthy so that we might not only enjoy their excess honey, but also eat many of the foods that are produced by the plants because of the pollination that occurs. We've all heard of the quote from Einstein that 30% of the food we eat is a result directly of the honeybees and their pollination. The cycle of life for plant, bee, and human are all done for the benefit of one another. Cheryl and I have found that a number of our regular honey customers who take a tablespoon a day of our unpasteurized honey have been actually cured of their summer plant allergies and no longer take any medication since they no longer have any adverse reaction to plants. Honey can be a medicine that's made by the bees. Veterinarians in our area have referred farmers to us to purchase honey to apply to injured and cut farm animals in order to help their healing. Honey, when it breaks down in direct contact with flesh, produces, amongst other things, hydrogen peroxide, which helps to sterilize the wound. In World War II, honey was given the nickname of Russian penicillin, since it was so commonly used to treat wounds by the Russians, who at that time didn't have access to the newly developed penicillin. While a few individuals can have severe life-threatening reactions to honeybee stings, the venom of the honeybees has been used for decades now by people with a variety of autoimmune disorders, such as MS and rheumatoid arthritis, to alleviate their conditions. While the stings do not cure the disease, they do greatly reduce the symptoms. We personally know of many people who have benefited from regular bee stings. In addition, I remember one day when I was working on my house when a beam slipped and it bent my middle finger back way further than it was ever designed to go. I knew that was not going to be good news, and so I immediately went and got a bee and gave myself a bee sting in that finger. And while over the next week the entire finger turned into one massive bruise, I never felt pain from that injury. Bees cannot live on their own. They depend on each other for survival. They need each other's help in gathering food, raising their young, and looking after their homes and keeping warm in winter, very much like you and I. When bees swarm, and you've probably seen this on TV where there's a large mass of bees gathered in one spot in a tree or on a building or a vehicle, this is occurring because the bees are too crowded and are seeking to split into one or more groups. And this is how bees reproduce themselves, as colonies. Interestingly, they choose their new home by a discussion that takes place on the report of scout bees. And when a consensus is reached, then they make their move. Consensus decision-making is, of course, the pattern that we follow here in church. When the pioneers were settling the country, they brought honeybees with them from Europe because they're not native to North America. The indigenous peoples knew when the settlers were coming west because the bees would have swarmed and preceded them. And they were initially known as white man's flies. For centuries, beekeepers had to harvest honey by taking the honeycomb that the bees used to store the honey in and melt it down to separate the wax from the honey. It wasn't until 1852 when an Anglican minister in the United States, of course they would say Episcopalian, Anglican's much easier to say, I determined that if the frames that the honeycomb is on were spaced a mere 3/8 of an inch apart, the bees wouldn't join the honeycomb together. And they could then remove these frames individually, extract the honey, and reuse the frames of honeycomb wax for the bees the following season. Not only did this save the bees a lot of effort in making new wax every year, but it also allowed the beekeeper to inspect the hive on a regular basis to determine if there were any problems in the hive, and thereby have a chance to intervene and help the hive before it would historically have died. Working with bees, in a way, is an act of meditation. One must be totally concentrating on what one is doing, and one must move slowly. You can move your hand over bees slowly, and they won't even look up. But move your hand in the same area quickly, and the bees will launch an assault with a number of stings being the result. Each bee sting releases an attack scent, and more stings are likely to quickly follow. Working with bees with gloves on is awkward and clumsy. Working without gloves helps to teach you patience and slow, deliberate movements. Honeybees, like humans, have a lifespan with specific roles and jobs at different stages of their life. First, they clean the cell in which they were born in. Then they become nurse bees and help to feed the young larvae after they have hatched from eggs. Then they accept the store nectar brought back by the foragers, and later they themselves become the foragers. Finally, they complete their lives as guard bees, defending the hive entrance from possible invaders like wasps and hornets, and even mice looking for a warm place to spend the winter. Reverend Ian, in his first sermon in this season of creation, mentioned that animals, and therefore even insects, live in some remote parts of our planet which we have yet even to be seen by humans. Their purpose, he said, was amongst other things to delight God. As a beekeeper of over 40 years, I can certainly share in delighting in all aspects of the life of honeybees and their role in nature and our world. I hope this brief introduction to them might help you share in the joy that is God's creation.